The indigenous peoples of Ukraine have had their own statehood and glorious history for centuries. But that golden era ended when invaders came to Crimea.
Історія депортації мого народу – це історія моєї родини передусім, тому що мене назвали Акімом на честь мого діда, який був депортований з Криму в 1944 році. Що означає для підлітка опинитися, коли тобі 12-13 років, ти опиняєшся десь після тижневого маршруту в переповненому вагоні, де люди помирають, боліють тіфом, всіма рештою хвороб, ти опиняєшся десь в степу, і нема твоїх рідних, і ти маєш щось робити далі.
The Russian Empire and its Soviet successors carried out forced deportations of Crimean Tatars from the moment the peninsula was seized back in the 18th century.
Кримські татари, вони одним своїм існуванням, вони, в принципі, руйнують головний наратив взагалі Росії щодо Криму, що Крим – це споконвічна російська територія. І коли росіяни бачать кримсько-татарські хати, коли росіяни бачать кримсько-татарський одяг, коли чують кримсько-татарську мову, це для них завжди нагадування, що вони там чужинці, що Крим не їхній.
These myths continued to fuel the mass consciousness even when history entered yet another terrible cycle.
We fought for half a century to return to our historical homeland, and now our people are once again leaving their lands. The deoccupation of Crimea is vital for us. It is a matter of our nation's survival, of not disappearing from the map of the earth.
The extermination of the Crimean Tatar people and their history is a true genocide. Russia denies it, unlike the other countries such as Canada, Latvia, Lithuania and Poland.
Це питання історичної справедливості. Ми хочемо показати світу, що ми насправді зараз реанімуємо міжнародне право, міжнародне гуманітарне право, міжнародне кримінальне право.
Визнання депортації кримськотатарського народу геноцидом є дуже важливим політичним кроком. І Україна продовжує працювати над тим, щоб більше країн визнавало факт депортації геноцидом.
General recognition of the deportation of the Crimean Tatars as genocide and of modern Russia as the successor of the Soviet totalitarian regime will help the world finally call things by their true names. It will break the cycle of history in which the indigenous peoples of Ukraine have been held hostages by Moscow's oppressors for 300 years.
Розпочинаємо четверту панель саміту.
We are beginning the fourth panel of the summit, the 80th anniversary of deportation, genocide of Crimean Tatar people, control of Russia over Crimea as well as other territories of Ukraine, always means repressions and genocidal practices. The moderator is Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Yevhen Perebyinis.
Ladies and gentlemen, to open our next panel, I have great pleasure and honor to invite our distinguished guest today, the First Lady of Ukraine, Olena Zelenska. Шановна Олена Володимирівна, прошу вам слово.
Дуже дякую.
Thank you so much. Dear friends, I thank you first of all for being here with Crimea, with Ukraine, and I would like to begin my short speech with a quote. It's a short quote, the memories of an older person about childhood. Let me read it. Soviet soldiers came at night on the 18th of May 1944, breaking our doors with guns. One of them beat my mom and shouted, "We'll throw you away." We were put to the trains and brought to Uzbekistan. They threw away the bodies on the way. We were all very sick. We started to live in barracks. 6-7 families per barrack. People were dying, starving. My father couldn't find anyone to bury the dead. This is the fragment from the story about the Russian deportation of Crimean Tatars, which is very typical. because these horrors, these atrocities were really typical. These are the same witnesses of the deported who survived. How the bodies were thrown away, the bodies of dead children were thrown away because the train did not stop to bury people, how the families died of starvation in the steppe. Approximately 46% of Crimean Tatars died then. They could not survive through this Soviet genocide. But this quote, which I read, belongs to a special woman, Vegia Kashka, who is the human rights activist, the veteran of Crimean Tatar movement. Living through an awful deportation in childhood, she still managed to come back to her motherland, and she devoted her life to the fight for the rights of Crimean Tatar people. And when she got older, she died after she was detained by Russian law enforcement authorities during the strike, during the manifestation in 2017, and she felt bad, and the emergency could not bring her to the hospital. She died on the way there. This vicious circle was over in her life. First, the Empire soldiers went through her childhood, deprived her of her motherland, and then the same people occupied her Crimea again, made her hurt, taking her life. But in fact, the life of the whole country took place like that, of many Ukrainians, of all of us. The empire would never stop if it is not stopped. The Soviet and Russian occupation of Crimea in 2014 has become the beginning of the new crawling war against Ukraine, when they want to kill not only the people but their identity. Dozens of Crimean Tatar activists, the grandchildren of those who lived through deportation, are now in Russian jails just because they are who they are, because they want to live on their land and they stand for this right, and even without any weapons. This is where Russification of educational institutions started. This is where militarization of children started, forced deportation of the underage children, and the illegal adoption, in fact, kidnapping of our children. This is how Ukraine is shouting to the world, and this is why we created the coalition on the comeback of Ukrainian children, because one country cannot cope such actions. Tomorrow, during the opening of the 4th summit of First Lady and Gentlemen, and I invite you to go there, you will hear from the first hands such Crimean stories, how it is to live through your own childhood under occupation. And again, it repeats awfully. The generation of 80-year-old are telling about their childhood in deportation, and the generation of today's children is telling about their childhood in occupation. Those are not just patterns of history. This is the wheel destroying humans' fates, and this is the wheel which is already rolling by the will of Russian Empire, as it was never punished for its Soviet crimes. And the criminals who were committing this forced deportation, they did not have their own Nuremberg court trial. That is why this wheel is still rolling on. The deportation of Crimean Tatar this year is 80 years, dating back 80 years. Today in the morning, together with our foreign guests, we opened the memorial for the victims of this genocide. But I'm sure that the most important memorial, the monument to these awful events, should be truth. We should disseminate the truth as fast as possible about the residents of Crimea and what Russia has committed and going on to commit. We know about that in Ukraine, but it's important that maybe the whole world should get to know about that. For centuries, the world was consuming Russian vision, rewritten history, and that is why Truth is decolonized history, the history in the eyes of not the colonizers, but the ones who they oppressed. Many peoples have already decolonized their history, and now Ukraine finally chose its rightful voice, which is free from Russian narrative. That is why we launched such an initiative, which has the name of Global Coalition of Ukrainian Studies. And let me tell you a couple of words about what that is. We have Ukrainian studies, the studies of Ukrainian science in many universities of the world. Those are academic communities. And now we are really interested so that this network to be expanded. So the initiative of the creation of the global coalition of such studies was presented in July this year in Washington. In my opinion, it's an important educational partnership, academic partnership, which has to help dissemination of truth about Ukraine and Crimea in particular, because we'd like to develop Crimean Tatar studies within the Ukrainian ones, because the people of Crimea have the right to be known. That is why Crimean Tatar studies have to be part of Ukrainian studies, as well as Crimea is part of Ukraine. Soon the coalition will have its own project office, and meanwhile the Crimea platform, which has become the key political tool to remind about the necessity of the occupation of Crimea, should become the tool of accumulation of efforts for decolonization of perception of the peninsula, the perception of Crimea and Crimean residents. Here we have the representatives of the President of Ukraine in Crimea, and also the Special Commissioner of the President of Ukraine on Sports and Education, the representatives of Ukrainian Institute, the Ministry of Education, who are working together so that we could form that coalition and to involve the necessary resources for the development of already existing Ukrainian studies and to create the new ones. This work really needs huge efforts and resources. We hope that next year the countries which are the participants of the Crimea platform will also be involved in this work. Today my speech at this platform has a very specific objective: to support these efforts and to call on you to join. The ways and formats of support can be diverse, and now they are being developed and soon will be presented to the countries participants of Crimea platform, so that during the next summit we could see already the outcomes of this work, strengthening of Ukrainian studies in the work and foundation of new ones, and the emergence of new projects, internships and exhibitions devoted to the real face of Crimea. Esteemed friends and foreign friends, this cooperation for us is so important, as truth is important not only for us, it is important for the whole world, for each country and culture which doesn't want to be under oppression, cancelled by someone's aggression, for everyone who doesn't want totalitarianism at their land. Truth and the knowledge of truth is the freedom and security. So I call on the world, get to know, disseminate the truth about Crimea, about Ukraine, so that this truth could save you as well, maybe. Thank you. Thank you so much for your speech, Elena.
Our next speaker is a true representative of his people, the leader of the Crimean Tatars, member of the Ukrainian Parliament, Mr. Mustafa Dzhemilev. Mustafa Aga, запрошую вас до слова.
Please, the floor is yours.
Saygılı Ukrayna'nın birinci hanımefendisi
Esteemed First Lady of Ukraine, Ms. Olena Zelenska, esteemed heads and representatives of the countries, participants of the 4th Summit of Crimean Platform, dear compatriots in the occupied Crimea, ladies and gentlemen. For all of the countries and international organizations which are taking part in this summit, let me express my deepest gratitude to the number of participants of this summit, which is increasing year by year. It is so important for us that the topic of the occupation of Crimea to be permanently represented in the international agenda. The President of Ukraine, in his speech and statements, including the first summit of Crimea platform in 2021, And at the iftar for the Muslim warriors, he said that the war has started since the occupation of Crimea by Russia took place and should be over with the full liberation of all of the occupied territories.
Kırım'ın sakinleri için bu çok önemli ve umut verici açıklamadır. Çünkü demek ki bazı basiretsiz siyasetçilerin tekliflerine
Residents of Crimea should have confidence, as it is sometimes said by some of the politicians. Crimea will not be the bargaining coin for the sake of the temporary end of war. It will be definitely liberated from this lengthy occupation.
Bu her şeyden önce bildiğiniz gibi Rus işgalini neredeyse tamamen reddeden
First and foremost, for the people of Crimea, who have almost for 100% never acknowledged the occupation, and for more than 10 years, as before, is considering Crimea an inseparable part of Ukraine, and that is why, is under repression of the occupier. Dozens of young people were killed and hundreds were in jail. Tens of thousands are under the pressure of occupiers who were forced to leave their motherland and to move to the continental part of Ukraine. After the invasion of Russia in February 2022, when the borders of Russia with Ukraine were closed, and especially after beginning of the forced mobilization by Russia of the residents of Crimea, people were trying to find shelter in different countries of Europe and North America. The civilized world understands perfectly that this is not the war for liberation of territory of Ukraine from the aggressor. It is also the war for the triumph of the international order against the person who assumes that if he has a numerous and well-weaponized army, that he can intrude into other countries and occupy them. This is the war against the bandit. It is also very important during these hard days for us, for those who is providing the comprehensive help and support. It is so important that the help should be sufficient and timely. And it will make the end of the war closer and save the lives of many people. Obviously, our military commandment understands better when and in what order the operations should be conducted on the liberation of the occupied territories. But many military experts and also state officials, among which Ben Hodges, ex-army commander of the United States, the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and the head of intelligence service of Ukraine, Kyrylo Budanov, and many others consider that the main key to stop the war could be the liberation of Crimea. In the end of the last year, our armed forces were already ready for the operation on deoccupation of Crimea. And I, even with the help of our hackers, on the 31st of December, created a short TV video call for the residents of Crimea. In particular, I expressed an assumption that next year will be the last year of occupation of Crimea, and I offered the measures to protect the civilians during the military operation. Then, however, it could never occur that our main ally will suspend his support for several months. And in the end of the day, we did not even move on. On the opposite, we lost several settlements. As our military told, for 10 shots of an enemy, we could respond only with 1 shot. In several months, it does not help the liberation of Crimea, its quick comeback, and the end of the war.
söz konusu o silahlarla Rusya'nın topraklarına ateş açmak yasağıdır.
Because of the prohibition to use the weapons provided by the Allies against the territory of the aggressor. It's weird, because the aggressor can strike against the territory of Ukraine from their bases. They can destroy our infrastructure, kill our citizens, our children, and we cannot strike back, because it can, as it seems, irritate the aggressor and help the escalation of the war. But we really hope that the Western partners will hear us, and all of those issues and misunderstandings will soon be eliminated, and the war will be over, according to the peace formula of the President of Ukraine. To conclude, I would like to remind what the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, said during the second summit of the Crimea platform. What is at stake is the freedom of all of us and the peace in all of the parts of the world. Thank you for your attention. Thank you so much, Mustafa Aga.
Now I would like to give the floor to the professor of Ukrainian studies at Cambridge University, researcher of the history of Crimea and United 24 volunteer, Mr. Rory Finnin. Please, Professor, the floor is yours.
Високоповажна пані Олено,
Dear
Загили,
Olena,
Мустафа Ага, почесні захисники та захисниці
Mustafa
України, дорогі друзі,
Aga,
колеги, салам алейкум.
the defenders of
Як
Ukraine,
науковець, який
Salam
вивчає
alaikum.
українську
As
культуру та історію,
a researcher
історію та культуру
studying Ukrainian history and culture, particularly that of the Crimea, I'd like to invite you to revisit the past, particularly 1777, when Catherine the Great went all the way across Ukraine to Bakhchisarai, the then capital of the Crimean Khanate. The majority of history books at the time and after that described the trip as the one full of glitter and majestic spirit. Little was said about the resistance Catherine met in the Crimea. Many Crimean Tatars in Bakhchisarai turned their backs to Catherine, refusing even to look at her. It was really a surprise for Catherine's French friends. And Catherine would write later on that the Crimean Tatars keep to their stupid pride even after the conquest. One of the reasons allows me putting it squarely and plainly, to some extent, Western researchers and academics would really let down Ukraine, the Crimea, and the Crimean Tatars. Many of us were focused on the empire itself, its greatness, so-called narratives of great statehood, without paying much of attention to the voices of resistance, like those of the Crimean Tatars, who had opposed Catherine the Great. Many of us in the West underestimated the depth of the Russian colonization, undervalued the importance of Ukrainian society. Unfortunately, we see such prejudices remain even today. But recognizing our faults may release us and free us, opening new opportunities, showing us certain things that have long been obscured. Let us be clear, Russia is a landlocked expansionist empire. And the Crimea is a piece valued by it as a colony. This is a place rich with history, geography, demographics. This is what Russia have been trying for long to erase from the face of the earth, primarily the rich culture and traditions of the Crimean Tatars. Let's also be clear that the Crimean Peninsula is a continuation of the land part of Ukraine, and the people living there do need Ukraine. This is not a slogan. This is a historical and geographic fact. The Crimea has been intrinsically tied to the mainland Ukraine, dependent on it. Let us also make it clear that the historic experience of the Russian and Soviet rule in the Crimea was the path of ongoing ethnic cleansings, religious cleansings, traumas, beatings, and sufferings. Because of that, most of the people in the Crimean Tatars as well, strongly voted in favor of the independence of Ukraine. And most of the Crimean residents have said it that the Crimea has to be part and remain part of Ukraine, because if separated, it will be doomed to fail, and if being kept by Russia, it will remain an ongoing source of global conflict. And we as people for whom the matter of freedom is not alien, we have to do everything to help the armed forces of Ukraine to deoccupy the Crimea and other temporarily occupied parts of the independent Ukraine. Even more, we need to deoccupy our collective mind. And let me use the summit to address the Western leaders. I ask you to invest in the future of the Ukrainian knowledge of Ukrainian realities and learn into the Crimean Tatar heritage, language and culture. I ask you to continue supporting those scholars and students majoring in Ukrainian matters elsewhere abroad. Please listen to them, learn from them, provide them with opportunities to develop today, tomorrow. Investments in science about Ukraine are a recipe of peace and flourishment of the upcoming generations.
Thank you very much, Professor. Пані і панове, оскільки програма першої леді сьогодні дуже насичена, вона не буде нас залишити. Давайте подякуємо.
The daily schedule of the First Lady is very dense. She will have to leave the meeting, and let us thank her for her attendance.
Our next speaker is His Serene Highness Hereditary Prince Alois of Liechtenstein. The floor is yours.
Dear President Zelensky, Excellencies, I welcome today's summit as a timely opportunity to reaffirm my full support and solidarity with Ukraine. Liechtenstein will continue its political and financial support and will continue to welcome Ukrainian refugees. Liechtenstein also supports the joint statement that will be released today. Earlier this year, Liechtenstein took part in the Peace Summit. I congratulate Switzerland for the organization of this important conference. Now, a timely follow-up remains key, including the implementation of the summit's joint communiqué on a peace framework. Excellencies, Liechtenstein has been consistent in condemning the illegal annexation of the Crimean Peninsula as well as of other illegally occupied parts of Ukraine. We have also been consistent in emphasizing that we will not recognize these annexations. At the same time, we condemn the systematic and large-scale atrocities committed by Russia in Crimea. Ending the aggression against Ukraine and ensuring full accountability for it must be our highest priority, both in the interest of international peace and security and in safeguarding the rules-based international order. In this respect, we applaud the Ukraine's decision to join the International Criminal Court. This is a step of highest importance for our joint efforts in ensuring accountability for the crimes committed against Ukraine. We believe that those most responsible for the aggression must be held accountable in a court of law on the basis of international law. Intense efforts are underway to create a special tribunal for the crime of aggression. In the current geopolitical context, it is also of strong overarching interest to strengthen international law against aggression and to ensure that the International Criminal Court has jurisdiction over the crime of aggression at the same level with that of its other core crimes. Liechtenstein therefore remains committed to working on a solution that both serves the purposes of establishing a special tribunal and for further advance international criminal law on the basis of customary international law. We are committed to invest the time necessary and look forward to continue our work with all of our partners. We have seen on several occasions in the United Nations General Assembly that an overwhelming majority of the states want to live in a world ruled by law and not by might. This should encourage us all as we chart the way forward to ensure accountability both for the sake of Ukraine and for the sake of our international legal order. Mr. President, Excellencies, today's summit once again conveys a strong message of unity to Ukraine. Let us carry forward the momentum from this summit and ensure that justice prevails. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Serene Highness. Allow me to introduce our next esteemed participant, His Excellency Mr. Christian Mackoski, Prime Minister of the Republic of North Macedonia. The floor is yours.
Dear President Zelensky, dear friends, Excellencies, it is a great honor for me to be here, even via video message, and to have the opportunity to reaffirm my unconditional support for Ukraine and the Ukrainian people during this difficult time. My country is fully committed to supporting the Ukrainian people and to providing all available assistance for as long as needed. We maintain our unwavering commitment to Ukrainians' independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity. Moreover, our support for your country is unconditional. We have repeatedly condemned this war in the strongest possible way, and we have continuously demanded that Russia fully respect international humanitarian law. We have taken part in all initiatives to support Ukraine, such as the International Crimea platform. We are an active participant in the core group for the establishment of the Special Tribunal for Crime of Aggression against Ukraine, including a new register of damage as the first step towards any future compensation mechanism for the harms being done. And this is not just merely a Ukrainian issue, but also a global concern and unified call for justice. We are also part of international coalition for the return of Ukrainian children. We have adopted all sanctions against Russia. Our already substantial support for Ukraine has been bolstered with financial assistance and with military support. Also, the temporary protection for the Ukrainians in my country has been extended. A major rebuild of Ukraine will be needed when the war is done. We also remain committed to the international efforts for the reconstruction and recovery of Ukraine. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, dear President Zelensky, dear friends, unfortunately, Russian aggression against Ukraine did not start on 24th of February. It started earlier, 10 years ago, with the illegal annexion of Crimea. And this was the beginning of Russia's aggressive and unlawful acts against your homeland and your people. My country does not and will not recognize the illegal annexion of the temporary occupied territories. Dear Ukrainian friends, let me repeat once again, my country will stay by your side in these difficult times, and we will stand with Ukraine as long as it takes. Let me take this opportunity to call for ending the war in Ukraine and demand Russia's immediate withdrawal from the country and to call for the restoration of Ukrainian territorial integrity within the internationally recognized borders. I hope I will also have the occasion to pay a visit to Kiev soon. Slava Ukraini, Heroям Slava!
Heroям Slava! Thank you, Prime Minister. And now I have the honor to invite our next speaker, His Excellency Prime Minister of Norway, Jonas Gahr Støre, to take the floor, please.
President Zelensky, Excellencies, colleagues, I would like to thank you personally, President Zelensky, for convening this important summit. A decade now has passed since Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea. A decade during which Russia has responded to any dissent on the peninsula with harsh repressions. Opposition has been stifled, freedom of expression has been brutally suppressed, and Russian citizenship and laws unlawfully imposed. So my message to you today is threefold. First, my government and the Norwegian people stand up against the persecution of the Crimean Tatars. As we mark the 80th anniversary of the forced deportation of the Crimean Tatars, they are once again, being persecuted by the Russian occupying power. This is completely unacceptable. Second, we stand in awe of the remarkable resilience and courage of the people of Ukraine. In the Black Sea, Ukraine has significantly weakened Russia's Black Sea fleet, pushing it far from Ukraine's shores. As a result, you can once again export grain and essential goods to the benefit of the world at large. And third and finally, and most important, we stand by Ukraine's fight for freedom. Norway is proud to be leading the Maritime Capability Coalition together with the United Kingdom. We remain committed to this task and we will continue to do our part. Norway will never cease to call on Russia to halt its military actions immediately and unconditionally. We call on Russia to withdraw all its troops and equipment from the entire territory of Ukraine, including the illegally annexed Crimean Peninsula, because Crimea is Ukraine. So thank you for convening this summit. Thank you for reminding us of this important decade that we need to mark in history. And thank you, President Zelensky, and all the best to you and the Ukrainian people.
Thank you, Prime Minister. And we stay in the Nordic region of Europe. And I would like to invite His Excellency Prime Minister of Sweden, Ulf Kristersson, to take the floor, please.
President Zelensky, dear Volodymyr, dear friends, in the year that has passed since the third ICP summit, Russia has continued its brutal war of aggression against Ukraine. And Ukrainians have continued their heroic fight to defend not only their country, but also our security. In the third year of Russia's full-scale invasion, we also mark the tragic fact that 10 years ago, Russia illegally annexed Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. 80 years ago, Stalin ordered the forced deportation of Crimean Tatars. Today, Russia continues to inflict great suffering on the Crimean Peninsula. Extrajudicial killings, arbitrary arrests, deportations and the forced transfer of children, forced mobilization of Ukrainian civilians into Russia's armed forces, politically motivated prosecutions and repression of ethnic and religious groups, in particular Crimean Tatars. Like its illegal annexation in eastern Ukraine, Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol violates international law and has no effect. Sweden does not and will not recognize Russia's illegal annexations of Ukrainian territory. We must remain united and persistent in our support for the full restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity in line with Ukraine's peace formula. This is essential for a just and lasting peace in accordance with international law. Accountability, including for the crime of aggression, is necessary for justice to the victims and deterrent against future violations. That is why Sweden supports the establishment of a tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. Sweden also supports the International Criminal Court, which investigates war crimes and other international crimes in Ukraine. We welcome Ukraine's step to ratify the Rome Statute of the ICC. Support to Ukraine is Sweden's top foreign policy priority. Sweden and the EU will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. Thank you, and Slava Ukraini.
Slava. Thank you, Prime Minister. And now I would like to invite to take the floor His Excellency, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Mr. Christopher Luxon. Please, the floor is yours.
President Zelensky, global leaders, excellencies and friends, greetings from New Zealand. New Zealand's been a supporter of the Crimea platform since its launch in 2021, and we continue to see participation in the platform as a way to channel our collective voices and to hold Russia to account for its aggression towards Ukraine. New Zealand condemned Russia's attempted illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014, and we continue to condemn it now. Russia's occupation of Crimea, like its occupation of other parts of Ukraine, is a gross violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognised borders. Russia's ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine has taken an appalling toll on Ukraine's people, its environment, its economy and its civilian infrastructure. In July at the NATO summit held in Washington, I chaired a meeting of the Indo-Pacific Forum countries, Australia, Japan, the Republic of Korea, and of course New Zealand. We discussed the way North Korea's ballistic missiles and weapons are now being used by Russia to fight its war in Ukraine, and we recommitted to work together with our close partners to defend sovereignty, to protect our trade routes, and to preserve the international order. Russia's attempted strangling of Ukrainian trade from its ports in the Black Sea since 2022 has been a direct consequence of Russia's ongoing illegal occupation of Crimea. Russia has ultimately failed, thanks to Ukraine's efforts to restore maritime security in the Western Black Sea and to develop the Black Sea shipping corridor. Prosperity is only possible with security, and the whole world benefits when commercial shipping can move safely and supply chains are maintained. I congratulate Ukraine on its successful efforts in this area. New Zealand Defence Force personnel have been deployed to Europe in missions supporting Ukraine since mid-2022. And these missions, involving nearly 100 New Zealand personnel, will continue over the coming year and will include delivery of maritime explosive ordnance disposal training for members of the armed forces of Ukraine. It is our intent that this training will assist Ukraine in maintaining maritime security in the Black Sea. And in addition to the efforts of our Defence Force personnel, New Zealand has also announced this year new sanctions on individuals and entities supporting Russia's military efforts, additional military assistance for Ukraine to procure arms and ammunition, including drones, and support for the medical rehabilitation of Ukrainian military veterans. While the armed forces of Ukraine continue to fight valiantly in self-defence, we look forward to a future when Ukraine can enjoy a comprehensive, a just, and a lasting peace. When I saw President Zelensky in Washington, I assured him that whether by helping Ukraine defend itself or sanctioning Russia, New Zealand is in it for the long haul. And that's because we demand that international rules are respected, and it's because security is indivisible, and what is happening in Ukraine reverberates globally.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and let us welcome our next speaker, Mr. Jan Borg, OSCE Chairperson in Office, Minister for Foreign Trade and European Affairs of Malta. The floor is yours.
Dear President Zelensky, Excellencies, I'd like to thank the Ukrainian government for inviting me to address you in my capacity as OSCE Chair in Office. It has been 10 years since the Russian Federation illegally occupied the Ukrainian Autonomous Republic of Crimea, an act of aggression that culminated in the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Over the past 2.5 years, we have witnessed widespread destruction and immense human suffering. Russia's war has undermined rules-based international order and weakened the European security architecture our predecessors fought so hard to build. Our repeated calls for Russia to cease its aggression and recommit to its international obligations have so far been unsuccessful. Nevertheless, we remain resolute in our mission to achieve a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. Our determination is rooted in the legitimacy of Russia's violation of Ukraine's sovereignty, which began with the illegal annexation of Crimea a decade ago. As we mark the somber anniversary, we must remember the importance of the Helsinki Decalogue's founding principles, including respect for the rights inherent in sovereignty, the non-use of force, and the inviolability of borders. These principles, agreed upon by OSCE participating states as far as back as 1975, are crucial to guiding our conduct as members of the international community. And this is why Malta has made support for Ukraine a priority of its OSCE chairpersonship. As chair in office, I'm committed to ensuring the OSCE remains a platform for accountability, building on the milestones set 50 years ago. Excellencies, we are deeply concerned about the human rights situation in Crimea. A recent UN report highlights alarming violations, including harsh reprisals against dissent, forced disappearances, arbitrary detentions, torture, and ill-treatment. Arbitrary detentions, in particular, have cast a dark shadow over the OSCE. The unjust detention of the 3 OSCE officials starkly underscores the consequences of failing to uphold our principles and commitments. We continue to urge Russia to ensure their immediate release, as well as the release of all those unjustly detained for exercising their right to free speech against the illegal occupation. Excellencies, 10 years on, we are here to reaffirm that we will not recognize any forced change of the international legal status of Crimea and other temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. Malta's OSCE chairpersonship will keep working to safeguard the principles and commitments enshrined in the Helsinki Final Act, which remains the foundation of our steadfast support for Ukraine's independence and sovereignty. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And now I have a pleasure to give the floor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany, Her Excellency Annalena Baerbock. Minister, the floor is yours.
Imagine waking up in your hometown. It's a chilly, windy day. A day that could be like so many others. But foreign soldiers have set up camp at City Hall. not far from your house. They are roaming the streets, and they want you to cast your vote in a sham referendum in which both options are yes. This is what happened in Crimea 1 decade ago. Crimea is where the Russian war against Ukraine started, not in February 2022, but in February 2014. Crimea today is a place where no freedom exists, where owning a document that still bears a Ukrainian trident means you might be forced to apologize on camera, where listening to the song Chervona Kalina in your own home can get you arrested, where owning a Ukrainian flag brings you 15 days of detention. Those are just examples from this summer. And as we all know, it doesn't stop there. Russia is prosecuting Crimean Tatars in show trials, deporting them to prisons in remote Russian regions. And Russia has turned Crimea into a military springboard for its full-scale invasion. We bow to the Crimean Tatars who opposed this since 2014. We applaud the successes of Ukrainian defenders in decreasing the maritime risk that Russia poses in the Black Sea. And we welcome that Ukraine has cleared the path to bring its urgently needed grain to world markets again. We will never accept Russia's illegal occupation of Crimea. It is legally null and void. Germany is Ukraine's largest supporter in Europe, both in military and civilian terms, with our support totally close to 35 billion euro since 2022. We will remain by Ukraine's side for as long as it takes, so that Ukraine can win this war and win its peace, so that the people of Yalta and Simferopol will again wake up facing a hopeful future, as citizens of Crimea that can sing their own songs in their own homes and fly their own flag, as citizens of free Ukraine, and one day as citizens of our European Union.
Thank you, Minister. And now I turn to the Secretary General of the Federal Public Service of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Belgium, Ms. Theodora Gentis.
President Zelensky, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in February 2014, Russia illegally occupied Crimea and then proceeded with an illegal annexation. 8 years later, Russia escalated with an unprovoked and unjustified full-scale invasion of Ukraine. These acts constitute some of the most blatant violations of the UN Charter and international law. Since the start of Russia's illegal war against Ukraine, many Ukrainian soldiers and families have tragically had to make the ultimate sacrifice to defend their countries. And in the past weeks, Russia has been launching some of its biggest and coordinated air attacks on Ukraine so far, wounding and killing many innocent people and causing widespread destruction all over the country. All our thoughts are with the victims. In line with the UN Charter, and to put an end to the unbearable human suffering, to the destruction of infrastructure and cultural heritage, Ukraine is lawfully exercising its right to self-defense. Ukraine has achieved significant success in its military actions in the Black Sea and has accomplished restoring international shipping routes, thus ensuring international food security. And we stand behind Ukraine. We are gathered here today for the 4th summit of the International Crimea Platform with one more common goal: the full restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. Ladies and gentlemen, Belgium strongly believes in the power of multilateralism and in a rules-based order. In the current geopolitical turmoil, it is imperative that we raise to the various challenges that our continent is facing. The foundations on which our world was built in the aftermath of the Second World War had never seemed so fragile. What is happening in Ukraine is also a war of values, a war against the democratic and European aspiration of the Ukrainian people. It is a war in which Russia, a permanent member of the Security Council, violates the most basic and important elements of international law and the respect for international humanitarian law, a war that undermines the international rules-based order and the fundamental right of the people of Ukraine to live in freedom of peace. We must continue to stand by the Ukrainian people so far as long as necessary and ensure that there is no impunity for the crimes committed in Ukraine. We have not forgotten and will not forget that people of Crimea are suffering under an illegal occupation, that citizens and human rights defenders are persecuted. The Crimean people have not known freedom for over 10 years. This illegal occupation must end. Ladies and gentlemen, on the occasion of this fourth summit of the International Crimea Platform, I want to underline once again that Belgium will continue to push for the implementation of the peace formula presented by President Zelensky until a comprehensive, just and lasting peace prevails. Ukraine can count on our resolute support. The future of Ukraine and all its citizens lies within the European Union as a free, independent and sovereign country. I thank you. Slava Ukraina.
Heroям слава. Thank you, Your Excellency. Ladies and gentlemen, we are slowly approaching the last part of our today's summit.